Harvard Divinity School.
100 Years Rudolf Steiner, December 15th and 16th, 2025.
And we have one more panelist before a short Q&A. Ron Eilon is a clinical social worker and PhD candidate at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He holds a master's in clinical social work and has worked in psychotherapy and psychiatric rehabilitation with young adults. And his doctoral research examines the development of anthroposophical social care in Israel. So welcome, Ron.
This presentation is my modest or a rather miserable attempt to squeeze in a very long PhD project into under 20 minutes. Luckily, thank you. Should work? Yeah. Luckily, Boaz already spoke about the most substantial aspects of the reception of anthroposophy in Israel. And I would like to take a closer look at curative education and suggest that curative education was the anchoring point of anthroposophy in Israel. Just to give a quick survey, our small country has over a dozen anthroposophical therapeutic initiatives. Alongside Kfar Rafael, a curative community in the desert of Israel, there are also Beit Elisha and Beit Uri, which care for adults with special needs. There is the Hiram community for psychiatric rehabilitation, Alma, a crisis stabilization center, Tuvia, which is a boarding school for children in out-of-home arrangements, and even two very unique Israeli creations, homes for adults on the autism spectrum within Jewish religious kibbutzim. The question that drove me to the study, since I got acquainted with anthroposophy to volunteering in Kfar Rafael some 20 years ago, was where did all this come from and how? Before we begin to go back in time, I'd like to join or to add my voice to the importance of the points that Aaron and Handel raised in their opening lectures, as well as the theme that Dan spoke about between practitioners and academic research. As we know, and also just heard from Jan, anthroposophical curative education is, in its very nature and essence, anything but a method. Unlike contemporary therapeutic protocols, you can't so easily write it down and email it. In a way, you must live it or experience it. Otherwise, you're a bit like someone who is memorizing a text in a foreign language and then claims to speak the language fluently. So to transfer curative education is translating it, which means being fluent in both anthroposophy and your new lived context. But what do you do? As Boaz already presented, what do you do when your context or your new context is Zionist Jewish state, an idea that the founder of anthroposophy was not too fond of? I'm not gonna talk about Steiner's views on Zionism and Judaism directly, because Boaz has already done so very thoroughly, and I want to try to make it as short as possible. But I think it is safe to say that both the most critical and not so critical scholars or researchers that try to figure it out couldn't get anything but a very complex answer to this question. So, as I said, curative education is not a method. It did not start as a distinct discipline. It started with people working in the field of education, care, and medicine who wanted to do it anthroposophically. Steiner's course of curative education offers a center meditative path, some ideas on sickness and health, on normality and abnormality, on destiny, and some diagnostical examples that hint about the ways of approaching children with special needs. The early writings of the first curative teachers are taking it on from there. For some years, at the beginning of curative education, almost all you can find in the writings, and some particular examples or case studies, and a bit of recent histories about the instructions that Rudolf Steiner gave to the first institutions like Lauenstein in Jena. The first one to formulate and write thoroughly about the practice was Fried Goether in 1928 in this article that simply translates to how the day in our institutions for children with special needs is structured. A daily structure is possibly easier to export than a meditative path, and perhaps this is one of the reasons why Ita Wegman sent Goethe to establish the first institution in England until in 1930. I'll leave Goethe for a second. I will come back to him in a short while. I want to bring one example to an essential claim of my study, that there is a certain continuation between curative education in Europe and in Israel. This example is that of Albrecht Strostein that also Jan spoke about. Strostein was one of the 3 young students who initiated the work in Germany and the first curative education institution there, Lauenstein. He also the one who approached Rudolf Steiner regarding the curative educational course. 1927, he left Lauenstein to work at the prominent institution Schloss Wilhelmshain. And during the Second World War, he resisted the Nazi authorities in an effort to prevent the closure of the institution. In June 1941, he was arrested by the Gestapo and imprisoned for 2 months. After his release, he enlisted in the Wehrmacht and served as a driver in the Ukrainian and Romanian front during the notorious winter of 1941 and 1942, where it is almost certain that he witnessed the beginning of the extermination of Ukrainian Jews. After the war, Strostein joined the founding team of Michaelshof in Hebsisau between Stuttgart and Ulm. And at the end of 1961, Strostein is traveling to visit Israel. We know that many anthroposophists visited there before the war. The best known were Emil Bock in 1932, and then Ita Wegman together with a group of physicians and curative teachers from Sonnenhof in 1934. But while they did make some connections with local anthroposophists, they did not aim to develop anything there. They only focused on sightseeing in the holy sites. Unlike Bock or Wegman, Strostein skipped the holy sites entirely. Instead, he's visiting every welfare institution one can think of: an immigrant absorption center, a school for blind girls, an elderly home, a juvenile detention center, and this whole time meticulously recording everything, every little detail in his notebook. He also gave a lecture in Jerusalem and met a group of parents who were interested in founding an institution in Israel. Strostein returned to Germany and tried to support the founding of the institution from there, and eventually made up his mind to go back to Israel himself and start the first Israeli institution for anthroposophical curative education in Israel himself. Unfortunately, several months later, he suffered a stroke and passed away. The person who attempted to take on Strostein's initiative was Raya Kern, who was already presented by Boaz as his grandmother. Ken was a Russian-born pianist who grew up in Munich, and by the end of 20, she was already a member of an anthroposophical society, apparently through her friendship with Ernst Leers. In 1933, she immigrated to Israel and settled in Tel Aviv, and then established later the Elijah branch that was presented. In the attempt to take over Strostein's initiative, Ken made a connection with Karl Koenig, the famous Austrian pediatrician of Jewish origin who founded the Campbell movement. The person who connected both of them was a woman with a catchy name, Theodora Maria Josefa Fischer-Kruner von Potocin, who was also the mother of Wilfried Immanuel, a child with a developmental disorders who was described by Steiner in the curative educational course. In the first letter that Kern is writing to Koenig in 62, she's describing the current situation of the initiative in Israel and the obstacle that she is facing, the technical ones being the lack of trained anthroposophical staff and annoying parents. She hoped that Koenig would come to Israel and or send some of his staff members, quote, to put everything on its feet. Raya Khan was neither a creative teacher nor a medical doctor. Her main motivation was to bring anthroposophy to Israel. And besides these technicalities, she considered two issues as being very problematic. The first one being Karl Koenig's negative view on Zionism, which he believed stemmed from Steiner's views or from Steiner's influence. And the second one was Koenig himself being subject to criticism from within the anthroposophical movement, initially for being on the wrong side of the 1934 crisis and later for other reasons. Regarding Zionism or nationalism, she's writing to Karl Koenig, quote, "These are not Jews emigrating here, but human beings with the positive and negative traits of their countries of origin. Russians, Poles, Moroccans, Hungarians, etc. Every new migration is processed, and so nationality disappears, and through it, the human being emerges." Regarding the critique against Koenig, Kern is writing to him, "Everyone, without exception, holds positive opinion about the pedagogical line, the institutions, and the work of the Campbell movement. And anyway, one has to think here everything anew. Establishing Campbell in Israel, his writing would not only be a therapeutic endeavor, but spiritualization of Christianity or anthroposophy. This is what Rudolf Steiner called the mission of the Jews." Koenig's response was surprisingly positive. He's writing to Kern, "I'm very happy that now, for the first time, a call is coming from Palestine to Campbell to help initiate therapeutic work, since I've been waiting for a long time for this call. However," he added, "my position regarding Zionism is not positive in any way, although I have great appreciation of what has been achieved in Israel in recent years." Happy enough with Koenig's response, Kern went to arrange a meeting that summer. She traveled to Scotland, stayed in Campbell for about a week, and had several conversations with Karl Koenig. She learned that Campbell was just becoming a solid international movement in the early 60s and decided that Israel cannot be left out. After that visit, though, neither fondness or enthusiasm was mutual. Koenig's reaction to Koenig's visit was, I may say, unfair. In a letter from August 1963, he's writing to Kern that her understanding of what was happening in Campbell was laying the seed, I'm quoting, of what is to be created in Israel. As for the first time, we have created the infrastructure for the work that will take place in your country. Hearing this, Kern rolls up her sleeves and gets to work. She's asking Koenig, just say what you want to do. Do you want to meet the staff? Do you want to give lectures? Do you want to meet patients? Do you want to lecture doctors? Anything. But Koenig not only ignores her invitations to come to Israel, but just a few weeks before he sent her that letter, he's writing to another Israeli friend, Baruch Urieli, about Kern's visit. Quote, "Miss Kern is convinced that behind what is happening in Israel right now, Angel Michael is at work. In some of her statements, she is completely fanatic. The conversations with her have convinced me that from the Campbell, nothing can be done. I didn't tell her that directly and even promised I might visit, but within me I'm convinced that it would be wrong to get involved there." I want to add that in my opinion, Koenig knew even earlier that he had no intention of engaging in anything that has to do with Israel. The woman who I mentioned, who connected Kern and Koenig, Dora von Potocin, she wrote Koenig asking him to help, quote, after everything that has happened to the Jewish people. But you also noted how Rudolf Steiner was, or must have been, disappointed with Hugo Bergman going to Israel as a Zionist, and she reminded Koenig to the extent to which Steiner opposed Zionism. In the response to von Potocin, Koenig is writing that he's shocked by Rudolf Steiner's statements that only confirmed what he was always thought, but never dared to say, that Zionism was the true pioneer of National Socialism. I'm going back to Fried Goethe into the 1950s. 1953, Goethe was approached by the English Jewish Association for the Parents of Backward Children to establish a home for children in the ultra-Orthodox community of Berkshire. Goethe refused, saying that anthroposophical curative education must be done, quote, on a Christian basis. But a delegation from the community was sent to convince him, and only succeeded doing that when the community rabbi asked Goethe, quote, whether Rudolf Steiner would also have had such narrow-minded concerns. Goethe started Ravenswood immediately, implemented the daily routine that he already structured, and trying to avoid the problems with the kosher food, Ravenswood was vegetarian. But the adjustments that Goethe made were not only external. In this 36-page letter to Karl Koenig, he's describing the transformation of his anthroposophical thinking. He's writing, the strongest of opposite imaginable comes towards one from Judaism. I'm faced with a problem that is totally new to me, but interesting. It always warmed my heart when Rudolf Steiner spoke of the Christ impulse, a terminology often not taken seriously enough, especially when one thinks about or thinks through omnipenetrability, in German Alldurchdringlichkeit. We should seldom use Christ's name because most people connect it with very wrong ideas. We should speak of the light of the world, the light of the spiritual world, and slowly lead humanity to an image of Christ that is far from any tradition. We must distance ourselves from all self-righteous sanctity, because that way we remain trapped within a kind of churchly sectarianism. This leads to an escape into ritualism, and people are therefore not called to inner mental activity. Now, among the Jews, I must try to shape everything in such a way that it will become visible. To reframe, through his encounter with Judaism, Goethe came to understand that the anthroposophical concept of Christ cannot be different for Jews and for Christians. Both have to deal with their background. I think it is clear why trainees from Ravenswood and not from Campbell were ones who started curative education in Israel. Ravenswood not only prepared the ground for what was to come, it was also the meeting place of the three women who founded the first initiatives of curative education in Israel. Ruth Moseman, a Swiss curative teacher who worked with Goethe for several years in Ravenswood, Ilana Schnell, an Israeli-born kindergarten teacher, who worked in Israel with a German pediatrician and Holocaust survivor, Erich Nassau. When Schnell asked Nassau where she can be trained in curative education, Nassau consulted none other than Albrecht Strossheim, who he met in Strossheim's visit to Israel just a few years before that. He was the one who recommended Ravenswood. Raya Kern also visited Ravenswood on her way to meet Karl Koenig in Campbell. It was then when she met the two other women. When Ilana Schnell brought Ruth Moseman to Israel, Kern was the one who took care of Ruth Moseman and for her employment in Shar Menashe, the governmental hospital. In that hospital, she founded a ward for anthroposophical curative education and ran it for about 4 years before or while establishing the first independent institution, Beit Eliyahu. In 1969, she wrote about a work in the official journal of the Israeli Welfare Ministry. This is the paper called Is It Worthwhile? Educating Children with Spatial Needs. What's interesting about this is not it's also what she wrote, but it's also this footnote under there that was put by the official editors of the Ministry of Welfare. They wrote, the Ministry of Welfare was interested in examining whether the treatment according to the anthroposophical method, which was successful in some foreign countries, could be adapted to the needs of our country. The experiment was satisfactory and is now continued in independent institutions. For a brief moment in the 1960s, anthroposophical curative education almost became the official governmental approach for caring for people with spatial needs in Israel. I will conclude by saying that this was just a very brief overview of one of 3 papers constructing this research, and I'll finish with a short trailer of the next episodes. The second paper outlines how the institutions developed in Israel, from a small-scale sporadic work that utilized existing infrastructure to independent institutions who had to gain social legitimacy on the one hand, while maintaining their unique spatial character on the other hand. The third paper is asking whether there is anything locally unique to anthroposophical curative education in Israel, like a local version on it. It starts with discussing the influence of the shared destiny of Jews and people with disabilities under the Nazi regime, and follows with later familiar developments in disability rights and the ideas of normalization and integration. It ends with some Israeli unique models, like the therapeutic communities within kibbutz communities. The message that all three papers has together is that in Israel, curative education has built a unique resilience that enabled it to navigate through complex political, cultural, and regulatory challenges that made it the anchoring point of the entire anthroposophical movement in the country. But this was never the goal, only a byproduct. Where importing anthroposophy was the goal, it was never successful. But anthroposophy thrived where the goal was helping people in need. Thank you very much.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, the Preston Fellows of Harvard College.